The whole kingdom had gathered to watch the queen choose a daughter, and not one of them was looking at the girl it should have been. They were looking at Nadia, the governor's daughter, glittering in gold and fine cloth at the center of the great hall, waiting for the royal necklace to be placed around her neck. In a matter of moments, she would become the adopted daughter of Queen Amara, heir to the throne of a great kingdom. The nobles were already smiling at her. The drummers were ready. The queen was rising from her seat, and by the kitchen door, forgotten in the shadows where the servants stood, was a thin young woman in a plain gray wrapper named Zara. Nobody was looking at her. Nobody ever looked at her. She had spent her whole life being the girl no one saw, the kitchen maid with no mother and no father, the orphan who woke before the sun to bake the bread that fed the very nobles who mocked her. She was not waiting to be chosen. She knew better than to hope for that. She had come only to watch, the way you watch a beautiful thing that was never meant for you. But here is what no one in that hall understood. Here is what the queen, reaching for the necklace, did not know. Here is what Nadia, lifting her chin to receive her crown, could not have imagined. The real daughter of that palace was not the rich girl standing in the light. She was the poor girl standing by the kitchen door, and the only person alive who knew the truth was a trembling old cook at the back of the hall, who had carried a terrible secret for nearly 20 years, and who was about to open his mouth and stop the entire kingdom cold. How does a lost princess end up baking bread in her own mother's kitchen? Who stole her? And who hid the truth? And why? And what did that old man see in the folding of a cloth and the humming of a lullaby that made his hands begin to shake? Stay with me until the end of this one, because the moment that old cook steps forward and bows, everything you think you know about this kingdom falls apart. The forgotten maid. Long ago, in a kingdom of red earth and golden savanna, there was a palace that gleamed like a jewel at the heart of a great city. And in the lowest part of that palace, far below the marble halls where the nobles walked, was the royal kitchen, a vast, smoke-warmed room of clay ovens and copper pots, of grinding stones and hanging herbs. And it was here, long before the first light touched the sky, that a young woman named Zara began her day. She was 19 years old, though she looked as if she had already lived several lifetimes of work. She had been in that kitchen since she was a small child, so young that she could not remember a time before it. She did not know who her mother had been. She did not know her father's name. She had simply appeared one day, an orphaned girl, left in the care of the palace. And she had grown up among the pots and the fires, learning to knead and to grind and to serve, and asking for nothing, because a girl with no family learns early that asking only brings disappointment. Zara woke before everyone, in the blue dark of early morning, while the whole palace still slept. She rose from her thin mat in the corner of the servants' quarters, and she went down to the cold kitchen and lit the first fire. She drew the water. She ground the grain. By the time the sun rose, the ovens were hot, and the bread was rising, and the smell of it filled the lower halls of the palace. Like a blessing, she did this every single day, and no one ever thanked her, and she never expected them to. But there was something in Zara that the hard work had never managed to crush. She was kind, genuinely, quietly kind, in a way that cost her something and that she gave anyway. When the little kitchen children were hungry, she slipped them warm bread from her own portion, even on the days when it meant her own stomach stayed empty until nightfall. When an old servant's hands ached too badly to work, Zara did the work for her, and let her rest, and never mentioned it to anyone. When someone wept in a dark corner of the palace, it was always Zara who appeared with a cup of water and a soft word. She had almost nothing, and still she gave, because her heart did not know how to do anything else. There was a saying the older women in the kitchen had about her, half in fondness and half in wonder. That one, they would murmur, watching her carry a double load so someone else would not have to. That one has the hands of a servant and the heart of a queen. They meant it as a small kindness, a passing thing. None of them could have known how close to the truth they had wandered. Sayings have a way of holding more than the people who speak them ever intend. And late at night, on her thin mat in the corner, when the palace was dark and quiet, Zara sometimes let herself wonder, just for a moment, before she pushed the thought away, who she had been before this, whether her mother had loved her, whether anyone, anywhere, had ever looked for her. Then she would take out the one thing she owned from that lost time, a small worn wooden spoon, and hold it in the dark, and tell herself It did not matter, and fall asleep. She did not know that the spoon in her hand was the answer to the very question she was afraid to ask. The nobles, of course, did not see her. To them she was furniture, a pair of hands that brought the food and took away the plates. And some of the other servants, who might have been her friends, chose instead to look down on her, because in a place where everyone has little, people will always find someone to stand above. Nobody even knows who her parents were, they would whisper. She could be anyone. She could be the child of a thief, or worse. And Zara would hear it and say nothing, and go on with her work. It was into this quiet, ordinary life that the news came, the news that would set everything in motion. Queen Amara, the ruler of the kingdom, was growing older. She was a wise and just queen, beloved by her people, known for her compassion and her sharp, fair judgment. But she had a sorrow that all the kingdom knew. She had no child. Long ago there had been a daughter, an infant princess, but the child had died, or been lost in a terrible night. Nearly 20 years passed that no one in the palace spoke of anymore, and the queen had never had another. Now, with her hair going silver, and no heir to carry her wisdom forward, she made a decision that swept through the kingdom like fire, through dry grass. "I have no daughter to inherit my throne," the queen announced, and her herald carried the words to every corner of the land. "And so I will choose one. I will open the palace, and from all the young women of this kingdom, I will select one to be my daughter, to be raised as a princess, and one day to rule after me. I do not seek the richest or the most beautiful. I seek a heart worthy of a crown." The kingdom erupted with excitement. In every household, with a daughter, hope caught fire. But everyone already knew, or thought they knew, how it would end. Because there was one young woman whom everyone expected to be chosen, Nadia, the daughter of the powerful governor, a girl raised in wealth, dressed in the finest cloth, schooled in every grace. She was the obvious choice, the certain choice. Down in the kitchen, Zara heard the news, like everyone else, and for one foolish, secret moment, something stirred in her chest, a longing so old and so buried that she had almost forgotten it was there. To be chosen, to be seen, to be someone's daughter. Then she looked down at her flour-dusted hands and her worn gray wrapper, and she laughed softly at herself and pushed the thought away. "Not for someone like me," she murmured, and went back to her bread. She had no way of knowing that the answer to a mystery nearly 20 years old was already stirring, not in the great halls above, but right there in the warm shadows of the kitchen where she stood. If this story is moving you, subscribe now. The ending will change how you see everything. In the days that followed, the palace filled with young women. They came from every province of the kingdom, daughters of chiefs and merchants and landowners, arriving in fine litters and on decorated horses, each one hoping to catch the queen's eye. The great guest halls, usually silent, now rang with laughter and rustled with expensive cloth. The whole palace seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the grand ceremony to come. And at the center of it all, as everyone had expected, was Nadia. The governor's daughter did not simply arrive. She made an entrance. She swept through the palace gates in shimmering robes, gold at her ears and throat and wrists, servants trailing behind her carrying her belongings. She was beautiful, and she knew it. She was rich, and she made certain everyone knew that too. And from the very first day, she carried herself as though the adoption were already decided, as though the ceremony were a mere formality before she took her rightful place beside the throne. Nadia noticed Zara almost immediately, not because she saw anything worth seeing, but because cruelty, like kindness, always finds its target. She saw the plain gray wrapper, the flower on the girl's hands, the way the other servants treated her, and she understood at once that here was someone she could step on to feel taller. "You there, Nadia," said the first time Zara brought food to the guest hall. "Kitchen girl, you have flour on your face. Do they not teach you to wash before you come before your betters?" And her companions laughed, and Zara lowered her eyes and said, "Forgive me," and Nadia smiled, satisfied. It became a habit after that. Whenever Nadia passed Zara in the halls, she found some small cruelty to fling. "Move aside, kitchen maid. Careful, girl. That dish is worth more than your entire life. Do you even have a family name, or are you simply the orphan?" She said these things loudly, so that others would hear and laugh, because Nadia understood that humiliation shared is humiliation doubled, and Zara bore it all in silence, the way she had learned to bear everything, and did not let it turn her heart, because while Nadia spent those days displaying herself, Zara spent them the way she spent every day. In the mornings, she saved the bread that would otherwise be thrown away, and she carried it to the poorest edge of the palace grounds, where the children of the lowest servants often went hungry, and she fed them with her own hands, and told them stories while they ate. In the evenings, when old Mama Efua's joints ached too badly to climb the stairs, it was Zara who helped her up, one careful step at a time, and sat with her until the pain eased. And every single night, long after the other kitchen workers had gone to their rest, Zara stayed behind to help the elderly palace cook, Baba Kofi, prepare for the enormous royal feast that would accompany the adoption ceremony. She did not do these things to be seen. That was the whole point of Zara. She did them when no one was watching, expecting nothing, because it was simply who she was. But she was seen. Once, on the third evening, Queen Amara, unable to sleep, walked the quiet halls of her palace alone, as she sometimes did, and passing near the servants' quarters, she paused, drawn by a sound, a young woman's gentle voice, telling a story to a circle of ragged, laughing children, breaking her own bread into pieces to share among them. The queen stood in the shadows and watched for a long moment, and something in her chest ached at the simple goodness of it. "Who is that girl?" she asked the servant beside her. The servant peered. "Only a kitchen maid, Your Majesty." "No one of importance. An orphan. Nobody knows her people." "Ah," said the queen softly, and she watched a moment longer, and then moved on, and did not learn the girl's name. But she remembered the face. She did not know why, but she remembered it. There had been something in that face, something that tugged at a grief so old and so deep that the queen had buried it years ago and forbidden herself to feel it. She shook the feeling off, and told herself she was a tired old woman imagining things in the dark. She was not imagining things, but it would take another pair of eyes, older and sharper, and holding a secret nearly 20 years deep, to understand what the queen's heart had only felt. Baba Kofi had cooked in the royal kitchen for longer than almost anyone in the palace had been alive. He was an old man now, his back bent, his tight curls gone white, his dark hands scarred from a lifetime of fires and blades. He had served 3 generations of the royal family. He had cooked the feast for Queen Amara's own wedding, and for her coronation, and though he never spoke of it, for the naming ceremony of the infant princess who had vanished nearly 20 years ago. He was a quiet man, slow to speak, who had seen a great deal and kept most of it to himself. And of all the people in that vast palace, he was the only one who paid real attention to Zara, because she was the only one who paid real attention to him. Night after night, as the two of them worked side by side in the emptying kitchen, the old cook had come to love the orphan girl like a granddaughter. He liked the quiet way she worked. He liked her kindness, which reminded him of a gentler time. And on the 4th night, before the ceremony, as he watched her prepare the royal bread, he began to notice things, small things, ordinary things, that slowly, one by one, began to make the blood run cold in his old veins. The first thing was the cloth. The royal bread, for ceremonies, was always wrapped in a special way, folded in a particular pattern that was taught only within the royal household, passed from one generation to the next, a small tradition that outsiders never learned. And as Baba Kofi watched, Zara, who had never been taught it, who could not possibly have known it, folded the ceremonial cloth in exactly that pattern. Her hands did it on their own, without thinking, as though they had always known how. The old man froze. Where, he thought, did a kitchen orphan learn the royal fold? The second thing was the lullaby. As she worked, Zara hummed. She often hummed a soft, wandering little tune, barely a melody at all, something she said she did not even remember learning. But that night, in the quiet kitchen, Baba Kofi heard it clearly for the first time in years, and his hands went still on the grinding stone, because he knew that tune. He had heard it once, long ago, sung over a royal cradle by a young queen to her newborn daughter, a private lullaby of the royal house, known to no one outside those chamber walls, a song that should have died with a lost infant nearly 20 years before. And here it was, humming from the lips of a kitchen maid who claimed she did not know where she had learned it. His heart was pounding now, but it was the third thing that nearly stopped it altogether. It was the spoon. Zara carried always a small carved wooden spoon, a worn, humble little thing she kept tucked in the folds of her wrapper. She had told him once, shyly, that it was the only thing she owned from before the palace, the only trace of whoever she had been, and so she kept it close, the way a person keeps the one thread that ties them to a past they cannot remember. That night, she set it on the table beside her as she worked, and the firelight fell across it, and Baba Kofi saw the small symbol carved into its handle, and the old man had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling, because he knew that spoon. He knew that symbol. He knew it because he had carved it himself with his own 2 hands. Nearly 20 years ago, a tiny gift for a newborn princess marked with the private symbol of the royal house, a mark that only the innermost family and their most trusted servants would ever recognize. He had placed it in that infant's cradle with his own hands. And then, one terrible night, the child and the spoon had both vanished from the world, and he had grieved them both, and buried the memory as deep as it would go. And now the spoon was here, in this kitchen, in the hands of this orphan girl. Baba Kofi looked at Zara, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw past the flour and the grey wrapper and the years of hard work, and he saw the shape of a face he had once known, the queen's own face when she had been young, the dead princess's face, grown to a woman. His hands began to tremble, and he had to turn away so that she would not see the tears standing in his old eyes. He wanted to fall to his knees. He wanted to cry out the truth to the whole palace. But Baba Kofi was old, and he was wise, and he knew the danger of what he was thinking. The child had vanished on a night of violence and treachery. Someone, long ago, had wanted this girl gone. If he spoke too soon, with nothing but a cloth and a song and a spoon, they would call him a senile old man. Or worse, they would silence him and her before the truth could ever be proven. He needed to be certain. He needed proof that no one could deny. So he said nothing. He swallowed the truth down, and he smiled at Zara, and he told her good night. And then he went to his small room, and he did not sleep at all. For the next 3 nights, the old man was at war with himself. In the dark, he turned it over and over. If he spoke and could not prove it, they would call him a mad old fool, and worse, they would look at Zara and wonder, and the hidden enemies who had wanted her dead as an infant might remember and finish what they had started. Silence had kept her alive for 20 years. Was it not safer to stay silent now? But then he would think of the ceremony coming, of the golden necklace descending onto the wrong girl's neck, of Zara growing old in the kitchen shadows, while a stranger sat on the throne that was hers by blood and by right. And he knew he could not carry this to his grave. He had saved her once, on a night of fire, when he was young and strong. Now he was old and weak and afraid. But he would have to find the courage to save her one more time, in the only way left to him, with the truth spoken out loud, in front of everyone, at the one moment when it could still change everything. He watched Zara those last few days with an ache in his chest that he could barely hold. He watched her feed the children and comfort old Mama Efua and hum that impossible lullaby over the bread, never knowing that an old man was memorizing every gesture, gathering his nerve. And each night he told himself, not yet. Wait for the ceremony. Wait until the whole kingdom is watching, so they cannot silence it quietly. Speak when it is too public to bury. He knew that in a few short days the queen would lift the royal necklace toward the wrong girl's neck, and he knew that if he did not find the courage in that exact moment, the true daughter of the palace would go on baking bread in the shadows for the rest of her life. The day of the ceremony came, and the kingdom poured into the palace. The great hall had never looked so magnificent. Banners of every color hung from the high ceilings. The floor was strewn with flower petals. Nobles and chiefs and dignitaries filled the vast room shoulder to shoulder, dressed in their finest, and beyond the palace walls, the common people gathered in their thousands, straining to hear. At the far end of the hall, upon her throne, sat Queen Amara in full royal splendor, and before her, upon a cushion of deep red cloth, rested the royal necklace, the ancient golden necklace of the royal house, which the queen would place around the neck of the young woman she chose, marking her forever as the daughter of the throne. And at the center of it all, radiant in gold and fine cloth, stood Nadia. Everyone knew. Everyone had always known. The governor stood proudly at the front of the crowd, watching his daughter take her place. Nadia lifted her chin and let the whole kingdom admire her, savoring the moment she had been certain of from the very beginning. Far at the back of the hall, near the kitchen door, where the servants were permitted to watch, stood Zara in her plain gray wrapper. She had come to see the ceremony, as everyone had. She held no hope for herself. She had never held any. She simply watched, and told herself she was happy to witness something so grand, and tried to ignore the small, foolish ache in her chest. The queen rose. A hush fell over the enormous hall. The drummers lifted their hands, ready to sound the great celebration the instant the necklace touched Nadia's neck. Queen Amara lifted the ancient golden necklace from its cushion, and its links caught the light and glittered. And she turned toward Nadia, and the governor's daughter bowed her head to receive it. And in that exact moment, with the necklace raised, with the whole kingdom holding its breath, with the drummer's hands about to fall, a cracked old voice rang out across the silent hall. "Your Majesty." "Wait!" Every head in the great hall turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For pushing his way forward from the back of the room, past the startled nobles, came a bent old man in a cook's stained apron, Baba Kofi, the palace cookie, his white head bowed, his old body shaking, doing the unthinkable, interrupting the queen herself at the most sacred moment of the ceremony. The guards moved toward him at once, hands on their spears. Nadia's face twisted with outrage. The governor went red with fury. "Seize that!" someone shouted. "How dare a servant?" But Queen Amara raised one hand, and the guards froze. There was something in the old cook's face that stopped her. A desperate, trembling urgency that was not the face of a madman, but of a man carrying something too heavy to hold a single moment longer. The queen had known Baba Kofi her entire life. He had never once, in all those years, for anything. "Speak, old friend," the queen said slowly, lowering the necklace. "What is it that could not wait?" Baba Kofi reached the foot of the throne, and he lowered himself painfully to his knees, and he bowed his white head to the floor. And when he lifted it, his eyes were wet, and his voice shook. But his words were clear enough to carry to every corner of that silent, breathless hall. "Your Majesty," he said, "before you choose, I beg you, please, look at the maid standing beside the kitchen door. Let it hang there just for a breath. A whole kingdom, frozen. A queen with a golden necklace still in her hands. A rich girl with her head bowed, waiting for a crown that is slipping away and does not yet know it. And an old man on his knees who has carried a secret for 20 years and has just, with 6 trembling words, cracked it open in front of everyone. And in the middle of it all, a poor kitchen maid by the door, her heart pounding, about to learn that the life she thought was hers was never the truth at all. Remember her face right now. Overlooked, invisible, nobody. Because after this moment, she will never be nobody again. Every eye in the great hall turned toward the kitchen door, and Zara, standing there in her plain gray wrapper, felt the weight of 1,000 stares fall upon her all at once, and she shrank back against the wall, her heart hammering with terror and confusion. What was happening? Why was the old cook looking at her? Why was the queen looking at her? She wanted to disappear into the stone. She had spent her whole life being invisible, and now, suddenly, horribly, the entire kingdom was staring straight at her. "Baba Kofi," the queen said, and her voice was strange now, tight with an emotion she could not yet name. "What is the meaning of this? Who is that girl?" The old cook drew a shaking breath, and then, kneeling before the throne, before the assembled kingdom, he began to speak, and the story he told turned the blood of everyone in that hall. "Your Majesty," he said, "nearly 20 years ago, on the darkest night this palace has ever known, your infant daughter did not die. She was stolen." The hall erupted. The queen's hand flew to her chest. Baba Kofi raised his voice over the uproar and pressed on, because he knew if he stopped now he would never find the courage again. "You remember that night, Your Majesty, the night of the attack, when armed men came in the darkness, and there was fire and chaos in these halls, and when the smoke cleared, the cradle of the princess was empty. They told you the child had perished. They told you there was nothing to be found. But that was a lie." His voice broke. "I know it was a lie, Your Majesty, because I was there. In the chaos of that night, I found the infant princess alive, abandoned in the confusion, and I snatched her up, and I hid her with my own body. And I understood, even then, that whoever had done this thing wanted the child dead, and that if I brought her back openly, they would simply try again and finish what they had begun." Tears were streaming down the queen's face now. The whole hall was frozen in horror and disbelief. "So I made a choice," the old cook went on, "and I have prayed every day for 20 years. That it was the right one. I could not protect her here, in the open, surrounded by the very people who wanted her gone. I have ever known. A good woman who had left the palace, and I begged her to raise the child far away, in hiding, as her own, and to tell no one, not even the child herself. And that faithful woman did. She raised the princess in secret, in safety, for many years." His voice dropped. "But that servant grew old, and fell ill, and knew she was dying. And with her last strength, she did the only thing she could think of to keep the girl safe. She brought the child back to the one place she knew. She would always have a roof and food and be overlooked. She brought her back to this palace, and left her among the kitchen servants, as a nameless orphan. Hidden in plain sight. Hidden so well that not even the girl herself knew who she was. I have watched her for years, Your Majesty, and told myself I was an old man seeing ghosts. But these last nights I have watched her fold the ceremonial cloth in the royal pattern that no outsider is ever taught. Her hands know it, though her mind does not. I have heard her hum, over the bread, the private lullaby you once sang above her cradle, a song that should have died with a lost child 20 years ago. And I have seen, in her keeping, a small carved spoon bearing the secret mark of this royal house." His voice cracked completely now. "I have kept this silence for 20 years, Majesty, and it has been a stone upon my chest every single day. I could carry it to my grave, but I will not let you crown a stranger while your own blood stands weeping by the kitchen door." And he pointed with one trembling old finger across the great hall, to the young woman shrinking against the wall by the kitchen door. "That girl, Your Majesty. That kitchen maid you have all walked past for years, that orphan you never thought to name. She is your daughter. She is the lost princess of this kingdom, and I can prove it." "Prove it," came a sharp, furious voice. It was the governor, pushing forward, his face dark with rage and fear. "This is madness, the ravings of a senile old cook who wants attention. You would halt the queen's own ceremony, humiliate my daughter on the word of a servant and his fairy story. Where is your proof, old man? Where?" A murmur of doubt rippled through the crowd. It was a wild tale. After all, too wild. And Nadia, recovering herself, let out a scornful laugh. "Yes," she said. "Prove it, or be thrown out for the liar you are." Baba Kofi did not flinch. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "I carved the spoon," he said quietly, "for the infant princess, a small wooden spoon, marked with the private symbol of the royal house, the mark known only to the family and their most trusted servants. I placed it in her cradle with my own hands. It vanished the night she vanished." He turned to Zara. "Child, the spoon you have carried all your life, the one thing you own from before this palace, bring it here." Every eye turned to Zara. With shaking hands, hardly understanding what was happening, she drew out the small, worn wooden spoon she had carried since before she could remember, the only piece of her lost past she had ever possessed. And she carried it forward, through the parting crowd, and placed it in the old cook's trembling hands. Baba Kofi held it up, and then he carried it to the throne, and placed it in the hands of the queen. Queen Amara looked down at the small carved spoon, and the entire kingdom watched as the color drained from her face, and her hands began to shake, and a sound came out of her that was half a sob and half a cry, 20 years in the making, because she knew that she knew that spoon, she had seen it in her own daughter's cradle a lifetime ago, in another life, before the fire and the grief had hollowed out her heart. She turned the little spoon over and over in her trembling fingers, and she pressed it to her lips, and for a moment the queen of the whole kingdom was simply a mother who had been handed back a piece of a child she had buried in her heart 2 decades before. And across the hall, Zara stood frozen, her mind reeling, unable to make the words fit together. Princess, daughter, stolen. She looked down at her own flower-dusted hands, at the plain gray wrapper, at the calluses of a lifetime of labor, and she could not understand how any of it could belong to the story the old man was telling. And yet, somewhere beneath the disbelief, something ancient stirred in her. The lullaby she had always known and never learned, the spoon she had clung to without knowing why, the strange, aching pull she had always felt whenever she glimpsed the queen from a distance. Pieces she had carried her whole life, suddenly clicking into a shape she had never dared to imagine. "Bring the old records," the queen whispered, and then, louder, her voice cracking, "Bring the palace records of that night. Every account, every name, bring them now." The records were brought, and in the long, breathless silence that followed, the truth came apart thread by thread, exactly as Baba Kofi had said. The accounts of that terrible night, read aloud, no longer matched the story the kingdom had been told. There were gaps, there were lies, there were names, and among them, woven through the treachery of that night and the years of silence that followed, was the governor's own family. For the truth, when it all came out, was this: the attack that stole the princess had not been the work of strangers. It had been arranged from within, by ambitious nobles, who wanted the royal bloodline broken so their own family might one day rise to the throne, and chief among those families, hoping across all those years to one day place their own daughter beside the queen, were the ancestors of the governor. They had helped bury the truth. They had counted on the lost princess never being found, and they had been this close, a necklace's breadth away from seeing their long treachery finally rewarded, with Nadia adopted as the royal heir. There had been whispers, over the years, of an old advisor, silenced, of records that did not add up, of a night no one was permitted to speak of. Now, read aloud before the whole kingdom, those loose threads pulled tight into a single ugly knot. The men who had attacked the palace that night had been paid. The story of the infant's death had been planted deliberately to end the search before it could begin, and the family that had gained the most from a broken royal bloodline, the family that had spent 20 patient years maneuvering their own daughter toward the empty place beside the throne, was the governor's own. The governor's face went gray. He began to babble, to deny, to back away. But the guards who had come to seize an old cook now turned at the queen's command and seized him instead. His long-hidden conspiracy had at last seen the light of day, and the kingdom recoiled from him in horror. He had waited 20 years for this ceremony, certain it was the moment his family would finally claim the throne. It had become, instead, the moment the truth he had buried rose up out of the ground to bury him. As for Nadia, she lost everything in that single moment. Not because she was rich. The queen had never held her wealth against her. She lost it because, in the end, she had been chosen by no one but her own family's greed, and because the whole kingdom had now seen her true heart. The cruelty, the scorn, the arrogance she had shown to the very girl who turned out to be the true princess. Kindness had been remembered, cruelty had been exposed, and Nadia was led away in disgrace beside her father. Queen Amara rose from her throne, and with tears streaming freely down her face, she came down the steps, past the necklace, past the nobles, past every rich and powerful person in that hall, and she walked the length of the great room to the kitchen door, where her lost daughter stood trembling and overwhelmed. And before the entire kingdom, the queen took Zara's flower-worn face in both her hands, and looked into the eyes she had grieved for 20 years, and pulled her child into her arms at last. For a long moment, mother and daughter simply held each other, and the whole kingdom wept with them. When at last the queen drew back, she kept hold of Zara's hands, as though afraid to let go, and she turned to face her people. For 20 years, she said, her voice ringing through the hall, I believed my daughter was lost to me forever. And all that time she was here, beneath my own roof, baking my bread, feeding the hungry, comforting the old, asking for nothing, while others dressed in gold and demanded to be seen. My daughter served in the shadows and was content to be no one at all. She looked at Zara, her eyes shining. I searched for a heart worthy of a crown. I did not know that the worthiest heart in my kingdom was the one I had overlooked. But it was what Zara did next that the kingdom would tell its children about 4 generations. The overwhelmed young woman, who moments ago had been a nameless maid and was now revealed as the heir to the throne, turned to her mother, the queen, and her first request was not for herself. Mother, she said, and the word was strange and wonderful in her mouth. If I truly am your daughter, then let my first act as a princess be one of mercy. There are many in this palace who mocked me, who looked down on me, who called me an orphan, and worse. I ask you to forgive them. They did not know who I was. But more than that, it should not have mattered who I was. A person's worth is not in their birth. If they had been kind to the kitchen maid when she was nothing to them, that would have been the true nobility. Let this be the lesson, and not their punishment. I do not want my new life to begin with revenge. A stunned silence fell over the hall, and then it broke into a roar of weeping and cheering. For the people knew, in that moment, that they had found a princess truly worthy of the name. Queen Amara looked at her daughter with a pride too great for words, and then she lifted her voice one final time and made a declaration that would outlast her reign. Hear me, all of you, and carry these words to every corner of the kingdom. From this day forward let it be known, a royal heart is measured by kindness, not by birth or wealth. My daughter has taught me that, though I am the one with silver in my hair. Let no child in this kingdom ever again be judged by the name they carry or the coins they hold, but only, ever, by the goodness in their hands. And there was one more thing to be done. The queen called Baba Kofi forward, the old cook, who had stood weeping quietly at the edge of it all, and before the entire kingdom she honored him, the faithful servant who had saved an infant from murder, who had carried an impossible secret for nearly 20 years, who had risked his own life and his own good name to interrupt a queen and speak the truth at last. You gave up 20 years of peace to keep my daughter alive, the queen told him, taking his old scarred hands in hers. There is no reward in this kingdom equal to that, but everything I have is yours, old friend, for as long as you live. And Baba Kofi wept, and said the only reward he had ever wanted was to see this day, to see the child he had saved standing safe and known in the light at last. Zara became the queen's daughter, and the princess of the kingdom, and in time its beloved queen. She was draped in the fine cloth she had once only served, and she wore the ancient necklace that had nearly gone to another, but she never became proud, and she never forgot. To the surprise of the whole court, the new princess still went down, again and again, to the warm shadows of the royal kitchen, to sit with the servants who had once stood beside her, to break bread with the children she had always fed, and to cook, sometimes alongside a bent old man who had once carved a spoon for a lost infant and never stopped believing he would see her again. For the elders of that kingdom have a saying, and they tell it to their children to this day, that gold shines brightly in the sun, but it is only metal, and it warms no one. It is the humble clay pot, they say, the plain and overlooked thing, sitting quietly in the ashes that holds the fire and feeds the family, and keeps the whole house alive through the cold of the night. The rich girl glittered like gold, the kitchen maid warmed like the clay, and the kingdom learned, on that unforgettable day, which of the two a crown truly belongs to. For the truth of who we are cannot be hidden forever, not by 20 years, not by gray wrappers or flower-dusted hands, not by the scorn of the powerful or the silence of the fearful. Kindness given in the dark is remembered. Greed and deception, however well buried, are one day dug up into the light, and the person the whole world overlooks may be, all along, the very one it was searching for. If Zara's story moved your heart, if you believe that true worth is measured by kindness and not by gold, then do something for me now. Type the word crown in the comments so I know this story reached you. Share it with someone who has ever been overlooked, and who needed to be reminded that their goodness has not gone unseen. Subscribe to our family if you have not yet, so you never miss a story, and I will see you in the next one.